Good morning, and thank you for joining us here at I-24 News Morning Edition. This is the 22nd day of Operation Protective Edge, and we are in a special broadcast this morning, of course, until the hour of 10 a.m. The IDF has cleared for publication that 5 IDF soldiers were killed when terrorists attempted to infiltrate Israel using a tunnel which led from the Gaza Strip to Kibbutz Nachal Oz yesterday. 4 additional Israeli soldiers were killed and several more injured after a mortar round landed near a community outside the Gaza Strip in Israel, as fighting picked up yesterday after what was meant to be a brief Eid al-Fitr holiday respite. This brings the total number of military casualties to 53. Overnight, according to reports, the Israeli Air Force struck Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh's home in Gaza. No injuries were reported. Meanwhile, rocket alarms sounded throughout Israel, including the Tel Aviv metropolitan area in the middle of the night and in the early hours of this morning across the Eshkol region and the Chof Ashkelon Council. At the same time, diplomatic efforts for a ceasefire are dragging along, with the UN Security Council drafting a statement rejected by Israel as one-sided, calling for an immediate halt in fighting. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, last night at a press conference said that the Gaza op would go on until the tunnel threat was stopped. Gazans reported several killed in the strike near Gaza's largest hospital, but the IDF is now saying that a Hamas or another Islamist group's rocket misfire was responsible. According to statements by the Palestinian Health Ministry, since the operation began, 1,100 Palestinians were killed and more than 6,500 were wounded. And of course, since the start of the operation, 3 Israeli civilians and 53 IDF soldiers have been killed. With me this morning in studio is, of course, Dr. Uzi Landau, the Israeli Minister of Tourism. Thank you for joining us, Minister. And Alon Pinkas, the former Consul General of Israel in New York. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Landau, I do want to start with you. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, gives a brief statement about the continuation of the operation. And this comes on the heels of polls that show in public opinion in Israel, more than 87% want this operation to be expanded. Is that, anyway, in your opinion, impacting the Prime Minister's decision to move on?
Well, I think sheer logic says simply that now is the time to really go on and push the Hamas towards the conclusion of this war. Until now, as we have been restraining ourselves, we have been trying to avoid as much as we can any civilian casualties. And what is now seeming is that because of the demand from outside countries, we need to bring that to some kind of a conclusion, but we have to do this in a manner that all of the strategic infrastructure of Hamas, that is tunnels, these are missiles, including also the stopping the ability of the Hamas to equip themselves and organize themselves for a next future round of such hostilities. If they will have this opportunity, this must be achieved. This area must be demilitarized.
Can it be done by Israel, or does Israel need now an international partner, or honest broker at least, to demilitarize Hamas? Because we're hearing from the Americans on and again, and from the UN, the fighting first must stop. Afterwards, we'll demilitarize and disarm Hamas.
One has to understand that the only way to really come to demilitarization is this kind of a credible threat of an operation that will bring the Hamas to such a decision. Let me just remind us all that the first time it became for the first time possible to dismantle Syria, or Assad of Syria, for example, from its chemical weaponry was only after he was sure that America is going to bomb him. Before of that, he would listen to nothing. So even here, too, the terrorists must understand that unless they come to terms and demilitarize the area, not only Israel, but also the entire Western world will demand it and force it upon them. Perhaps one more comment. We have to understand that this entire war or battle is not just between Israel and the Palestinians - Hamas. Hamas is just a variation of a general theme of the Boko Haram terrorists in Nigeria, in those of Mali, those in Somalia, in the Horn of Africa, those in Kenya, those Al-Qaeda in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, we have Iran. That's an entire world type of Islamism, of radical Islamism that uses terror to promote its goals. In Israel is a stronghold. Israel is a bastion of democracy, protecting the interests and freedom of the free world in this particular corner. And these are terrorists that have to be defeated. This is the message.
I want to get a quick update now from our Channel 10's diplomatic correspondent, Moav Vardi. Moav, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Yael.
Yesterday, of course, we did hear from the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, also from the Defense Minister, and also from the IDF Chief of Staff. What would you say, maybe nothing new that they've all said? They're saying that the operation will continue, meaning what is the next exit strategy or next goal militarily that the leadership in Israel is looking for to actually put on the table and show the Americans, perhaps, this is where we're going?
Yeah, the Israeli leadership, including Ya'alon and Prime Minister Netanyahu, is willing to end this operation militarily with the goal of dealing with the tunnels, we dismantle the tunnels or destroy the tunnels. That's as of the military goal. And from that point on, the target or the objective of the operation is to achieve as best deal as can possibly be achieved in terms of demilitarization of Gaza Strip. Now, it's a very ambitious goal, and right now it's well understood here in Israel that it's not realistic to think about any kind of a full dismantling or disarmament of Hamas in Gaza in the end of this operation. But both the American and the UN and the EU both understand that there will have to be some kind of very, very close monitoring of the goods that is going inside Gaza, the goods, the funds, all these materials that are used for construction, civilian construction, but can use to build tunnels, like concrete and so forth. So, and you can see Netanyahu yesterday night at the presser start to talking about realistic objectives in terms of the demilitarization. He's not talking about to disarm Hamas from rockets or from tunnels. He is now focused on a mechanism that will enable the international community, or that will enable the very close monitoring of what is going inside Gaza. That should be achieved by the Egyptian and by the Egyptian in terms of the of the goods that are entering Gaza, the material that's entering Gaza, and the international community in terms of the funds.
But Moav, right, in terms of the security cabinet and the divided voices that we've been hearing coming out of the security cabinet throughout the ground operation, Netanyahu, one would say, was very resilient or at least hesitant to put the boots on the ground. Is this a new Netanyahu, or is he actually succumbing also to political considerations within his own security cabinet, and also, of course, a poll that your Channel 10 published just 2 days ago?
Yes, I think that Netanyahu will have to face a lot of criticism, or I would say he will get a hard time from the Israeli public that will tell him, and I will portray it very shallow, like what for we have 53 soldiers killed up until now, just to buy another few months of quiet before the Hamas start firing rockets again on southern Israel. But after all, I think that Netanyahu and Ya'alon are still at the point where they were a few days ago, which is their understanding is that what serves the Israeli interest best is not to go into a wide and deep military operation on the ground. So I think that in the cabinet, Netanyahu still has a majority. I mean, it contains him and Bogi Ya'alon, Minister of Defense, Livni, Lapid, and I will say Aronovich at least, if not Ardan. So if you take Lieberman, Bennett, and Ardan as 3 out of 8 that reject the notion that we have to stop now, and they are supporting to go further on to Gaza, then you see that Netanyahu, after all, can pass this resolution, or I would say this decision in the cabinet. And after all, Yael, the history taught us that when a prime minister wants something in terms of national security interest, it's very rare that he cannot convince the cabinet to do so, especially when the Minister of Defense is on his side.
Moav Vardi, of course, Channel 10's diplomatic correspondent. Thank you for joining us. Minister Laundo, I want to take you to the political aspect of this as well. As we spoke just now with Moav Vardi, the Security Cabinet, it's not a secret, is divided within itself. Even the head of your own party, Israel Beitenu, the Foreign Minister, Avigdor Lieberman, did come out even before the ground operation and say that he was for an expanded operation, even calling to reoccupy the entire Gaza Strip. Is this needed now at times of clear-cut war, especially when international credit is maybe almost diminished or diminishing?
Well, you always have within a security cabinet deliberation. People do weigh the different options, how to bring all that into an end in a manner that this area will eventually be demilitarized, and with the understanding that you got there a terror organization that doesn't care about its own citizens. It is protecting itself behind its own citizens. It is shelling and targeting our own citizens, and that the only way to bring it down is to really come to its very headquarters and just take it.
Meaning there is a military solution to this?
Of course there is a military solution. It has its price in it. And we have tried until now just to restrain ourselves as much as we can, but we also have to be responsible for our own people. And these are the deliberations, as I understand it, that go on in the Security Cabinet.
Do you follow suit with the Foreign Minister, Avigdor Lieberman, in his thoughts that maybe the Gaza Strip needs to be reoccupied?
Well, we do not want to really reoccupy Gaza. We do not want to control what's going on in there. And if we will do this kind of a thing, this is definitely possible, unless another demilitarization option, political one, will be available, which is not as of yet the case, then we will come into there and do what is necessary to clean the area, and then I'm quite sure we'll go back. It is very similar to what used to happen in Judea and Samaria. Just 12 years ago, when there were month after month after month, hundreds of our civilians were slaughtered. Not far away from here in the Dolphinarium, one night, 14 people were slaughtered. The Prime Minister Sharon then said that restraint is strength. The fact was that 6-7 months later, we lost hundreds of people. And just on the eve of Passover night, there was this activity that slaughtered 30 people with a suicide bomber in a hotel in Netanya.
Right.
This forced upon us to go into all of the terror cities in Judea and Samaria, to Shechem, Nablus, to Jenin, to Hebron, to Jenin, Kalkilia, you just name it. It was tough. We didn't want to do it. But this was forced upon us. And only after we did it, as of then, for 12 years, there is no shelling on Netanya or Kfar Yona from Tulkarem. Kfar Saba doesn't feel the wrath of suicide bombers from nearby Kalkilia. It's difficult to say that. But sometimes when a democracy confronts a terror organization, we have to take steps to protect democracy. And we wish and we expect the West to stand behind us on that. We are in the same battle.
But one will say, of course, that what happened, and you're describing the Second Intifada era and so forth. Way back, since then, we've had Operation Cast Lead, we'd have the Second Lebanon War, we've had Operation Pillar of the Defense. Is the Israeli public and even the international community ready to pay the price, the cost of a military solution in the Gaza Strip? 53 soldiers dead in less than 10 days of ground operations. Well,
the question is asked, in particular abroad. We are here ready for over 100 years of this endeavor of Zionism, of historical justice. Each time we have pogroms, we are trying to restrain ourselves. And the way that you do it causes for you to have higher casualties. We will continue. And you see this country making tremendous steps forward. On the one hand, we'll offer peace and calm to our neighbors. At the same time, we'll protect our people and their safety. And even now, what we have to learn is the lesson from all of these operations that you showed. As we went out of Gaza to the last millimeter 9 years ago, as of then, instead of understanding that as generosity and wish for peace on our side, they started to shell immediately the surrounding areas. And then the shelling continued to Ashkelon. People said, hey, why should we risk ourselves? It'll be down. And then we had another operation, and they were targeting Beersheba and Ashdod, going north, enlarging their range and the number of missiles and their accuracy. Let us all understand that if we are not bringing this round to this position, not doing what we did in the past times, but rather learning the lessons from our failures, we will have in the next round, at a time that they will decide, not only more missiles, not only with heavier warheads, not only more accurate and with extended range, but we already might have their chemical warhead from those that they perhaps could have. From what is left over in Libya or in Syria, we have to prepare ourselves against that.
I want to bring Alon Pinkas into the conversation. Alon, hearing Minister Landau's words, that might work with the Israeli public opinion, but it may not convince the international community and, of course, the Americans, which have said, in his third conversation with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Barack Obama insisted on an immediate ceasefire, no matter what, and then we'll talk about demilitarization.
Well, to be fair to President Obama, he insisted or demanded or put forth a humanitarian ceasefire to be followed by a cessation of hostilities.
Right.
And that cannot be contrasted with what's going on, because it's the Hamas that broke whatever tacit ceasefire there was. So by that token, Israel is not committed to the Obama paper. Obviously, Israel is committed to a degree. I agree with Minister Landau, but it seems to me like it boils down to an issue of clarity. If Israel made it clear at the outset, not the operational goals or not the tactical maneuverings, but what its strategic goal is, the international community would have either supported it, exhibit some kind of benign support, or even objected it, which could not and should not prevent Israel from proceeding. Right now, it's not clear to the world. It is not clear if there is a political end to this. You mentioned Foreign Minister Lieberman. You may agree or disagree with what he's proposing, but Minister Lieberman laid forth a clear strategic goal. Minister Landau did the same. The government thus far, and I'm not being critical, I do not envy the Prime Minister having to manage this at this time. And it's very easy to lash at him and criticize him without really knowing the inner workings and all the facts. But if Israel explained to the world that this is what it needs to do, and when I say the world, I'm not talking about public opinion. We still have this old Zionist fixation on what people in Sweden
are going to say.
Will say.
Yeah.
And you know what? Truth be said, it doesn't matter.
Right.
I haven't seen demonstrations in China, India, Japan, Brazil, Argentina, Nigeria, Mexico. I know the Brazilian ambassador. The U.S., and we're talking about 4 out of the 7 billion people on this planet. And we in this country still care about something that went on in Brussels or an editorial in a Dutch newspaper. All right, fine. We're Eurocentrics.
Someone has to be.
Someone has. Well, not us, not anymore, because I agree with Minister Landau in what he said before. This needs to be done. Any kind of understandings that bring us back to 2012 is a recipe for this to happen again in 6 months or 18 months. This can't go on. And so in that respect, yes, Israel should say an immediate yes to the Obama plan or to the Obama principles laid forth in his in the White House communique, but Israel should continue on doing what it needs to do.
Meaning there needs to be a diplomatic channel simultaneously.
Absolutely.
Which is, if we look at the security cabinet right now, a very divided one. Some ministers will say diplomacy is not needed now. We need a strict military solution.
Diplomacy is always needed as a supplement or as a complementary effort to the military operation. Let's not confuse how a democracy works. The military operation is subject to a political or a diplomatic objective, not the other way around. Does that mean that diplomacy puts on hold military operations? No. It needs to work in parallel.
Mr. Landau, do you agree that diplomacy needs to work in parallel? Because when we do look at the foreign minister and his actions of late, he hasn't put diplomacy maybe at the forefront of his agenda. In other operations, we've seen foreign ministers travel to other Western leaders and so forth to try to gain support. And as Alon said, to put the plan on the table, if this is indeed his plan, a military solution, why isn't he wooing other Western leaders to come on board?
Well, a couple of comments. The first one is that we are already there for the 22nd day.
Right, 22nd.
And still you do have an understanding in the international arena that some care in a positive manner must be taken with the terrorists in Gaza, again, which are a variation of a theme of international terrorism. Secondly, let's see what happened in Syria and how Syria was demilitarized from its chemical weapons. Only after Assad of Syria was convinced, knew for sure, that the Americans are going to bomb Syria to pieces, that he decided to back down, which means that only after there will be a credible military threat or an operation will diplomacy be here much more effective. And sometimes if you have this threat, you don't have to eventually go to this operation.
I somewhat, if I may, disagree with Minister Landau. I don't think the Assad regime is any better than Hamas.
Oh, I agree with you, fool.
But I don't know. Wait.
This
is now we'll disagree. But Assad is a state actor, and states act a little differently than terror organizations. And Hamas is a strange entity because it's
different rules.
It's a quasi-state,
Right.
which is why we're slightly confusing the terminology. We cannot demilitarize Gaza and Hamas without occupying Gaza and Hamas for 6 months, 4 months, or 18 months, and then that's an option, as Uzi Landau said. But we have to bear in mind that there are consequences. What we can do in a diplomatic setting is disarm Hamas of some of what it has. I have my doubts about the enforceability of such a scenario. Hamas is not an organization that would allow international peacekeepers and monitors and inspectors to walk into Khan Yunis and dig for rockets, which is why we're basically left with two simple options. Occupy and destroy Hamas, not as an ideology, not politically, but as a military force or as a terror force, or pursue a diplomatic effort, which has its downsides.
And when you say
Perhaps
right?
add on that,
Yeah.
I guess that you could join my party, the way you think.
Well,
And I fully agree with you that Assad, unlike what's happening in Gaza,
I don't do parties.
he's a state. Okay. Assad is a head of state. The Hamas also have responsibility to their own group.
Not really.
depending-
Not
Well,
really.
that's-
They should, but they don't.
Okay. But again, unless they see a threat, for example, that would totally crush them as an organization, they won't consider anything in addition.
I agree.
And I suggest to go into this diplomacy perhaps in step. Let's first put a credible threat. And if this won't work, we will be forced to go into Gaza, not because we want to do it, because we will not be left with any other option.
You think we should publicly, Minister Landau, we should publicly make that threat, or
No,
de facto?
I don't think that we should say we are going to crush Hamas,
Okay, fine. Just to be sure.
but we are going to get rid
I
of
understand.
the total terror infrastructure, including the human infrastructure, the commanders, the leaders,
But-
political and combatants.
which is something that one would call regime change, which perhaps hasn't worked so successfully in other parts of the world, which is why I want to ask you this question. Why not strengthen diplomatically partners in the region, such as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and put him on, in charge of this credible threat and not Israel?
Well, what we're trying to do is not to interfere in the Palestinian internal issues. Let them decide who's going to be their leader. On top of that, you suggest Abu Mazen. Let's not forget that he was elected in elections 2006, and this was up to 2010. We are now 4 years later, and each year he extends his presidency. If he were sure that in today's elections he would be elected, let me make you just clear, he would go for these elections. Our problem is that if you are going to have that election, in all of the previous examples we have had over the past 5 years, in every democratic election, the Muslim Brotherhood in all of the surrounding countries came to the helm.
Right.
And Hamas is the nickname to Muslim Brotherhood here. You speak about the
Which is
extreme
why to
forces.
strengthen Mahmoud Abbas with the Egyptians, all the players that weren't at the Kerry table
Yeah.
would probably most likely put pressure on Hamas that maybe that would serve as a credible threat.
They would like to get rid of Hamas. And please note, in addition to the
Even more of a
extreme
credible threat.
Hamas or Muslim Brotherhood axis we have in the Middle East, consisting of Qatar, of Turkey, of the Muslim, of the Hamas in our place, you have another more moderate a line of Muslims that
Right.
axis relies on Egypt, on Jordan, on Saudi Arabia, on the Gulf Emirates, on Bahrain, and they wish to see a different Middle East.
Alon?
What?
Strengthening Mahmoud Abbas as a
Look,
strategy, a diplomatic strategy.
Yeah, there's hypocrisy in this, because this is a government that consistently weakened Abbas, that never really engaged in a political process. Now, I am not saying that the entire responsibility lies in Israel. Quite the contrary. Abbas never showed the signs of leadership that you expect from a serious interlocutor. But you can't credibly go to Abbas and say, extend your control and power into Gaza, because otherwise there won't be a viable peace process. And on the other hand, not really negotiate with him for the last 2 years and insult Secretary of State John Kerry for his efforts on the peace process, not on the ceasefire, and then say, well, we want Abbas to be a mediator. What I'm afraid of is a scenario in which we occupy half of Gaza, based on what Minister Landau and I agree on,
Right.
and assume that the Palestinian Authority will then take over, and the Palestinian Authority, because of weakness or reluctance or political calculation, will say, no, we can't. And
Right.
then we're stuck there. We can't leave. There's no Dutch
And
or
we've seen it in the
Swedish or
past, right.
Argentinian peacekeeping force
That will
waiting
help
in the
us,
Mediterranean
right.
to take over. So
Let me
Miss-
say that even if we are locked into that, we'll still have no choice but to do it. And a long time, we'll find someone amongst them who will run their own show. We do not want to run their day-to-day life.
Minister Landau, quickly, we do have to break. The economic toll of Operation Protective Edge has been maybe humongous, and it's can't even be quantified yet on the tourism economy here in Israel, something that Israel thrives on, especially in the summer. What has been done in the short term and also in the long term to make these businesses, and it's a huge industry here, survive in the long run?
Well, we have already had these kind of opportunities in the past. We definitely pay a price in the very short run, because reasonable people don't go where people
Rockets
are
are
shooting.
firing,
Yes.
right.
But as you see what's happening in Israel these days, the month of August is, of course, the month of internal vacations. It will start mostly next week after Tisha B'Av, as we call it. And as much as it might be down, I'm quite sure that at the north and those areas which are out of their range, this will be as it has always been.
International visitors?
And right after that, we'll go into those kind of attempts, as used to be in the past, to revive, to enhance our tourist activities.
So you're not worried?
I worry, but I am reasonable, and I see that we will cut the losses, yes.
Minister Dr. Uzi Landau, thank you for joining us
Thank you.
this morning. Alon Pinkas, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this with more updates and, of course, our broadcast here at I-24 News Morning Edition. Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition. We are in a special broadcast this morning. It is day 22 of Operation Protective Edge. And we started, of course, today's morning with news of 10 soldiers who have died in the fighting in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. With me now is Amir Oren, Senior Defense Correspondent of Haaretz. Thank you, Amir, for joining us. And Channel 2 Foreign Affairs Editor Arad Nir. Arad, thank you for joining us. I do want to start with you. Two different incidents, very tragic incidents, where in the first, an infiltration or attempted infiltration through a tunnel that the Israeli forces had actually located within the Gaza Strip before, ending in 5 Israeli soldiers dead.
Yael, you are recounting it from the end forward.
Right.
In the 3 incidents which caused the death of 10 soldiers, the first one took the life of an engineering corps D9 driver, bulldozer driver, when Hamas militants came out of a tunnel inside Gaza and attacked his bulldozer. The soldier was killed, and then they were killed. Then the second incident was a mortar shell, which hit inside Israel with 4 armored corps soldiers who were killed. And the third incident, to which you referred to firstly, was again a tunnel which the Israeli military was certain was under its control, but apparently wasn't fully, and out of which emerged a squad of Hamas militants who attacked a pillbox, a position held by Israeli soldiers from a squad leader course, and 5 of them were killed. Apparently, the Hamas squad tried to abduct a body of one of the 5 Israeli soldiers killed, but the 6th Israeli soldier managed to kill those who tried to do it,
Right.
and the others managed to exfiltrate through the tunnel.
Meaning this was a tunnel that was known about, maybe not its entrance into the kibbutz, but its entrance or in the Gaza Strip was known about by Israeli forces a few days ago.
The basic outline was known. It led from Shajaya to the kibbutz Nahal Oz area, but apparently the exit was a bit south of the Karni passage,
Crossing, right.
where earlier there was heavy economic traffic between Israel and Gaza, but Hamas fired on it, so it was closed.
We're going to get a quick update now from our I-24 news correspondent, Michal Divon. You're on the Israeli-Gaza border this morning. Just from reports overnight, also from journalists there, Michal, saying that this was maybe the hardest night yet of the operation. Of course, here in Israel, rockets were flying over into Tel Aviv in the middle of the night. What do you know from the night in Gaza?
That's right, Yael. A very difficult night. A lot of noise and blasts heard here in the south of Israel on the Israel-Gaza border. As you mentioned, barrage of rockets towards both the center of the country and the south. We happen to be in Ashkelon, where alarms were heard throughout the night. Now, reports from Gaza are saying that the home of Ismail Haniyeh was targeted overnight, as well as the Al-Aqsa radio station and Hamas television as well. Vast airstrikes conducted throughout the Gaza Strip. Yesterday there was a definite shift and intensification of the operation after 2 days of a relative calm. You were speaking about the infiltration incident from last night. We were not
Right.
far away from that area. Definitely one of the more severe incidents. So this morning there's definitely a continuation of this. It seems like there's still a lot of activity happening here. We're standing 2 kilometers away now from Shujaiya, where we've seen already a few of the airstrikes and mushroom clouds behind us. We're hearing artillery once in a while, hearing drones overhead and other military aircraft. Not a quiet morning here, and it seems that the day ahead might continue in the same pace.
Thank you, Michal Divon, there on the Israeli-Gaza border. Amir, another incident yesterday, and I do want you to comment also on the IDF military activity overnight, was when Gazans reported that several had been killed near Gaza's largest hospital. The IDF then did clarify with the IDF Chief of Staff yesterday, Benny Gantz, in a press conference, saying it was actually a missile of at least another group in the Gaza Strip, not basically attributing to Hamas, but someone else.
Yes, one of the salient features of this campaign is that Israelis are killed inside Israel. And this was not the phenomenon in earlier campaigns.
Right.
Now, the Gaza rocket launchings are still going on, as you mentioned, including in the Tel Aviv area overnight. One of the Fajr rockets, the more long-distance rockets, fired by either Islamic Jihad or another organization, apparently exploded near its launching pad and fell on the hospital. Mm-hmm. So we know that approximately 1/3 of all rockets launched from Gaza fall in Gaza, especially those launched from the southern part of Gaza fall in the northern part of Gaza rather than in Israel. And apparently the organizations, Hamas and the others, don't really care.
But can that be proved? Can that be proved also not only for Israel and its own internal investigation, but also for the international community?
The Israeli internal investigations are quite easy to conduct because the military knows which units fired where. There can be mistakes and incidents and faulty ammunition and so on and so forth. But looking at the timeline and at the units involved in the attack at that time, it can rule out the participation of the IDF in such incidents. Also, it has overhead imagery by remotely piloted vehicles, so it can be shown quite conclusively, even to outside observers, that it was not Israel.
Elad, when looking at, I just took a quick look over the Twitter account of many international journalists in Gaza. They are describing last night as something that was unprecedented until now, and coming off of this hospital, of course, the reports, whether it was Israel or not, as a standing point for a turning point now in the warfare.
See, talking about the information that pours out of Gaza by international journalists, they felt actually worried last night, as they did not feel beforehand. Some of them felt that they're being targeted, maybe not personally, but the locations where they are were targeted. And the information that poured out was that some of the Hamas's media outlets were hit. Some of them are malfunctioning now. Some of them recuperated during the last couple of hours. So there's no doubt that there was a step up of the bombardment on Gaza. The only problem that I keep on saying regarding this whole campaign is that our Prussian friend von Clausewitz is turning around in his grave.
Right.
What are they trying to achieve? We've been saying now and again that the Israeli government seems to be dragged into this campaign. The Hamas is setting the pace. The Hamas is setting the magnitude of the campaign. But where are we aiming at? Where are we going to? And meanwhile, we heard yesterday the triumvirate that leads this whole campaign:
right.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Benjamin Gantz, and Bogi Ya'alon,
right.
The Prime Minister, the Chief of Staff, and the Minister of Defense. We tried to look into what they did not say in order to understand what they mean. So it seems that 3 weeks into this campaign, the Hamas is alive and kicking, and something is not functioning 100%.
Militarily, you're speaking.
Well, there's no diplomatic functioning, as far as I know. Maybe there are some intentions, but nothing is really functioning.
If I may interject, when Palestinians are killed in the West Bank, the day later we have a day of rage by Palestinian demonstrators.
Right.
What we had last night in Gaza was a day of rage, or at least an hour of rage, by Israel, following the death of the 10 Israeli soldiers, which the leadership knew about, even though the public only knew partially of.
Right.
Maybe there were worthwhile targets which the military considered. But it seems as if they lost their cool and acted emotionally rather than rationally in hitting back in this fashion because of frustration.
Meaning the targets that were actually targeted throughout the night, and we're seeing pictures of the Gaza Strip this morning, were targets that were on the military establishment's list anyway, but they were maybe triggered by yesterday's events?
Yes, they were triggered by the event. Earlier, there was the intention of keeping the calm, much as it was a false calm, perhaps a phony war style. But Israel would not have gone on such a strike had it not suffered these devastating losses.
But as Elad said, maybe you want to say it yourself, it doesn't deter from the fact that there is no actual military objective still on the table.
Well, there were always two military campaigns being conducted simultaneously here. One was against the rocket launchings and the other one against the tunnels. And while they are connected to some degree, one of the two, the campaign against the tunnels, is basically over, except for the demolition. And the IDF can easily stop in its tracks and gradually leave the 2 mile or so strip of land that it occupies. This is not going to stop the rocket launching, because they still have thousands of rockets, and for that you need a diplomatic solution.
But how can we accept the information that the campaign against the tunnels is nearly over if we have such an incident as we had yesterday that 5 combatants actually infiltrated into an Israeli inhabited location through these tunnels?
The military was very careful not to boast. And when it speaks of some 32, perhaps 35 tunnels at hand, it is also careful to say that out of those, some 20 have been either destroyed or prepared for demolition. And of the rest, some 40% are partially controlled, others are being surveyed, are in the process. And one has to go through the tunnel with its many exits. And while this tunnel was known, the work was not completed. The IDF has never said that everything is okay. The question is, why wasn't it ready on the Israeli side of the border for just such an incident? And obviously there were gaps in readiness which will be looked into once the campaign is over.
I want to talk about the diplomatic efforts, or maybe perhaps the lack of diplomatic efforts. Yesterday, the political leadership of Hamas, Khaled Mashal, the head of the political leadership, of course, spoke with Charlie Rose, and it was aired, bits and pieces were aired on Sunday, but the full interview was aired yesterday in the United States. Let's take a quick look.
Those who started the aggression is the Netanyahu and the Israeli army. If Mr. Obama is stupefied or perhaps is surprised of such action, the question is as follows. Do you expect anyone not to respond if he is attacked in his own homeland? So Gaza responded as well. So why Obama and the leaders of the free world, why don't they surprise vis-a-vis the occupation of our land for several decades without having a window of hope? Would it be possible for us to live time and time again under occupation?
You believe in the coexistence of peoples, and therefore you believe in the coexistence of Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East.
I cannot coexist with occupation.
But without occupation, you can coexist.
I'm ready to coexist with the Jews, with the Christians, and with the Arabs and non-Arabs, and with those who agree with my ideas and those who disagree with them. However, I do not coexist with the occupiers, with the settlers, and those who
it's one thing to say you want to coexist with the Jews. It's another thing you want to coexist with the state of Israel. Do you want to coexist with the state of Israel? Do you want to represent, do you want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
No. I said I do not want to live with a state of occupiers.
Arad, from your experience, is there anything that can be derived from this interview that is saying something new to the Israeli political leadership?
Well, he's not talking to the Israeli political leadership. He's talking to his own home base and to the American political leadership. Well, there's a certain perception in the last 48 hours since this whole campaign against John Kerry started here in Israel. The Hamas is embracing the American administration. Some Israeli commentators are very excited regarding it. I do not tend to join this herd. They are trying to make points at the moment, and this is part of this propaganda war that goes alongside the military war on the ground. The point is that Hamas is trying to get a political solution. This is what they are trying to do.
By giving this interview also to Charlie Rose.
This is part of the whole campaign. Another part of the whole campaign is launching the rockets over Tel Aviv in the middle of the night.
But if
they are trying to bring, to drag the IDF or the Israeli government into Gaza, into the bloody streets of the most densely populated area in the whole world.
So what's the political solution here in that case?
their political solution is they want to uplift the siege, what they call, and when they say uplift the siege, they don't mean a controlled importation of cement into Gaza. They mean a sea harbor, they mean a airport, they mean free crossings and importation and exportation. This is what they mean. They think that the more casualties the Israeli side will have, the more easy it will be for them to come to such a political agreement with the state of Israel. Not directly through a third party, but this is what they aim at. And this is how I understand it. And I think that the sooner we reach such a situation, the better it will be. And as I said, you don't have to recognize Hamas. You can accept the fact that Hamas is there. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is saying for years now that there's a state, that there's a terrorist state in the south over there. So now let them be accountable for what they are and go tit for tat. It will be a long negotiations, not an easy one, very frustrating. Maybe with rockets coming in and out, but you have to start and come out with a certain idea, certain plan how to do it.
With us, we're going to go, we'll start here where we left off. But first, I do want to go to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, the IDF spokesperson. Peter, thank you for joining us this morning. Is it correct to say that last night, overnight, both maybe on the Israeli side and of course, within the Gaza Strip, was the most intensified night since the beginning of the operation?
This is a gradual increase of our activities, which we have been carried out over the last 3 weeks. And indeed, we are making Hamas feel pursued, paralyzed as an organization, and threatened as individuals. A reality where we're not willing to go on as they carry out these strikes against Israel, these tunnel attacks against our southern communities. And this is the reality. So we are indeed operating in order to address this threat.
And we're hearing, of course, reports coming out of Gaza in terms of international journalists as well, saying it was probably and I'm quoting here some journalists, the scariest night yet, not leaving their hotel rooms and so forth. What targets were attacked overnight by the IDF?
We carried out several strikes against the organization of Hamas, against I would say, the infrastructure of this organization that are operating under the guise of a regular government, but are actually governing a policy of terrorism from these positions, from these seats, from these locations, and therefore they are being struck. So if it's Hania himself, if it's the location of the government, of the various ministries, they have a lot to lose, and they are losing. This is a reality that they will feel the pain of the IDF's activities. They will realize that it is not worthwhile to attack Israel. They are going to feel paralyzed as an organization. And as you can see, they have been severely struck on all levels.
And you did mention Hania's house as one of the targets. We do know, according to reports, that he wasn't home, he wasn't hit. Is there going to be more of that kind of targeted assassinations, if you will, as a political, perhaps, aim to end this operation?
Well, naturally, you don't expect me to reveal our targets, but indeed, this organization has opened a war with Israel, and in every junction of possibility to de-escalate the situation, they've chosen to escalate. Yesterday, they had declared their own ceasefire, and during their own ceasefire, they had actually killed 10 Israeli soldiers in order to implement this ceasefire. So we are acting, we are operational, we are going to take this toll from this organization, and will not be permitted to attack us without consequence.
And just quickly, lastly, of course, yesterday Gazans were reported that several were killed in a strike near Gaza's largest hospital. The IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz revealed yesterday information showing that Hamas or other Islamist groups' rocket misfire was the one responsible. Is there more concrete evidence that Israel and the Israeli army can show the world that this, in fact, was not an Israeli fire?
So here's a thought. The world stands and applauds the Iron Dome system. The Iron Dome system locates the launch of the rockets as they come out of the ground. 90% success rate means it is 90% accurate as far as indication of rockets coming out of Gaza, which means we have, without any doubt, information, understanding, and evidence that is pointing directly to the point of location in the map that we distributed to the media yesterday of where these rockets came from.
Right.
One of them reached Ashkelon, 2 of them struck within Gaza, 1 of them at the hospital, 1 of them at Shati camp, and the fourth one fell into the sea. You're absolutely convinced that there is no other alternative. The IDF did not carry out this strike, despite the huge attempts of this organization to lie and cast the responsibility on Israel. When we are responsible for something like the Beit Hanun school, we say it, we investigate it, we take it seriously. We do not duck and dive from our responsibilities. We learn from our mistakes and we move forward. They are constantly targeting civilians. And when we are talking about indiscriminate fire, this is indiscriminate. They launch it up into the air. They hope it lands on Israelis. And yesterday it landed on Palestinians.
Lieutenant Colonel Peter Leonard, the IDF spokesperson, thank you for joining us this morning. Amir?
Going back for a second to the Charlie and Khaled show.
Okay.
In 1977, Barbara Walters interviewed Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat and thought she had a hand in diplomacy in facilitating the Sadat visit to Jerusalem. Ever since, many anchormen believe that they can mediate between Israelis and Arabs. There is a lesser amount of success. The Hamas vision is not to coexist with the state of Israel. It wants to establish an Islamic Sharia, Islamic law state in the entire land of Palestine, both sides of the Green Line. It never recognized even the 1949 armistice alliance. So it cannot coexist with Israel, definitely not with what it considers the occupation of 1967. What it wants to do is to have a regime in a foothold. Gaza is a foothold for them. They are willing to de facto coexist with what happens across the border until such time as they are strong enough to challenge Israel. But they have never gone as far as the Palestine Liberation Organization has gone under Yasser Arafat and now Mahmoud Abbas, and it is not practical to believe that they ever will. But if they can manage to get out of this campaign a concession by the West, including the United States, for instance, to strike them off the terrorist list, it will be a huge achievement for them. For that, they will have to demilitarize Gaza, at least from heavy weapons. This may not be in the cards now, but if the crisis grows even worse, who knows?
Well, we've been covering together and on our own various campaigns in the last
since the First World War.
100 years by now. And, you know, I remember the first days of the first Lebanon war, when the Israeli troops entered Lebanon and found all these underground cellars full of military and weapons and guns and RPGs and missiles and whatever you want over there. They had it, and it was a proof that there's no chance to strike any deal with the PLO. Eventually, Arafat was ousted by the Israelis under auspices of the nations out of Beirut into exile. And I don't have to repeat the whole history. So these are, I see it as starting point. These are the starting positions. From here, okay, as I say, I don't dare to speak about mutual recognition, but mutual acceptance until the days will come. You know, this old tale, old Jewish tale of the hard laborer that brought horse home and told his wife that he received it from the landowner because he promised to teach him to speak in 1 year. his wife started crying, oy vey, what's going to happen with us? In 1 year we'll be dead. He said, no, it's not necessarily will be dead. Maybe the landowner will be dead, maybe the horse will die. So things can happen under a long-term agreement. And I think this should be the minimum that the Israeli government should aim at now. And I would expect the Israeli government to come out with a plan, not sitting passively and waiting for others to draw a plan.
And we'll get to that plan in a second, because Kerry did come out with a plan, and perhaps he didn't invite
Kerry
you.
did not come out with a plan. I'll be happy to elaborate on it. I don't know if we have the time now or after the break, but I'll be happy to do it.
We will start then from that point exactly. We, of course, are going to be back after the short break. I-24 News Desk will be bringing you the latest headlines. And, of course, the special broadcast will be continuing. This is day 22 of Operation Protective Edge. Of course, there were rocket alarm signs throughout Israel overnight, including the Tel Aviv metropolitan area in the middle of the night. And, of course, in the early hours of this morning across the Eshkol region and Chof Ashkelon Council, we did, of course, hear from the IDF spokesperson as well. There was intensified fighting overnight in the Gaza Strip. Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader's house, was targeted. He was not at home. We will be coming back in just a few minutes. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us here at I-24 News Morning Edition. Today is the 22nd day of Operation Protective Edge. The IDF has cleared for publication that 5 IDF soldiers were killed when terrorists attempted to infiltrate Israel using a tunnel, which led from the Gaza Strip to Kibbutz Nachal Oz yesterday. 4 additional Israeli soldiers were killed and several more injured after a mortar round landed near a community outside Gaza. And fighting picked up yesterday after what was meant to be a brief Eid al-Fitr holiday respite. This brings the total number of military casualties on the Israeli side to 53. Overnight, according to reports, the Israeli Air Force struck Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh's home in Gaza. No injuries were reported. Meanwhile, rocket alarms sounded throughout Israel, including the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, in the middle of the night and in the early hours of this morning across the Eshkol region and the Chof Ashkelon Regional Council. At the same time, diplomatic efforts for a ceasefire are dragging along, with the UN Security Council drafting a statement rejected by Israel as one-sided, calling for a halt in the fighting. The Prime Minister Netanyahu last night at a press conference said that this Gaza op would go on until the tunnel threat was stopped. Gazans reported several killed in a strike near Gaza's largest hospital, but the IDF has said also this morning here at I-24 that Hamas or other Islamist groups' rocket misfire was responsible. And according to statements by the Palestinian Health Ministry, since the operation began, 1,100 Palestinians have been killed and more than 6,500 were wounded. And on the start of the Israeli side, 3 Israeli civilians and 53 IDF soldiers have been killed. With me in studio now is the intelligence and security expert Yossi Melman. Yossi, thank you for joining us. And staying with us, of course, is Arad Nir, Channel 2 Foreign Affairs editor, and the defense correspondent the senior defense correspondent for Haaretz, Amir Oren. Thank you. We do want to get a quick report update from I-24 News correspondent Merav Seville. Merav, you're in the Soroka Hospital in Beersheba.
Yes, Yael, I'm here at Soroka Hospital. As of right now, there are 36 soldiers who are hospitalized here. One of them is very seriously injured, 5 more seriously injured, and the rest between moderate to light. We're told that from the 2 incidents yesterday, there were 9 soldiers who were brought in here. Several of them underwent surgery. We're waiting for further information about how they are doing this morning. Other than that, it's been about 40 hours since sirens were heard here in Beersheba. So yesterday, while fighting did pick up on the Gaza Strip, it has been quiet for the residents of Beersheba.
And of course, Merav, the residents of Beersheba also were woken up to sirens this morning. How does the Soroka Hospital deal with the sirens in real time? Of course, the hospital is one place that not is all under shelter. How does the hospital staff and so forth deal with it in real time?
The hospital deals with it pretty well. They're saying that they are capable of dealing with everything that's going on, not only with the situation itself, but with bringing in more soldiers and people who need to be hospitalized. We're waiting to speak with them to see just exactly how they can deal with it after Netanyahu saying that this is going to be a prolonged activity, how they think they'll be able to handle it for a longer period of time. Other than that, residents of the community continue coming here to Soroka to bring food and to families and soldiers who are hospitalized here.
Mirav Savir, thank you for that update from Soroka Hospital. You, of course, will be updating us throughout this special broadcast. Arad, I do want to start off where we left off, and that is, of course, the Kerry plan. That is irked, I would say. That's the best word to use. Everyone from the left and the right, including journalists here in Israel, who have come across it and said, Kerry just doesn't know what he's saying.
Well, the journalists were fed by somebody, and this unanimous choir, as I said, I am reluctant to join. Kerry's paper was a suggestion. It wasn't a plan. I am well acquainted with the details of the Turkish-Qatari plan that was presented to him by Turkish Foreign Minister Davutoglu. This plan was hallucinacious. There's no other way that I can call it. It was titled Ways and Means to Prevent Israel from Attacking the People of Gaza Whenever It Feels Like Doing It. It's a paraphrase, but this was the idea of the Turkish-Qatari plan. My sources gave it to me on Friday when Davutoglu left Doha on his way to meet Kerry in Paris. And I think that yesterday the foreign minister of Qatar, Al-Attiyah, referred to this kind of title in a speech that he gave. So Kerry definitely diluted this plan. He tried to take some structures that were embedded in this plan and presented to the Israeli government as ways to go forward. Now, Kerry made mistakes. The Americans do make mistakes. Maybe they do lack some abilities or knowledge how to deal with the Middle East. But this is not the way you behave towards your allies. The ADL Secretary General Abe Foxman yesterday issued a statement in which he is condemning the Israeli smear campaign against Kerry. He said that the United States of America is Israel's only true ally in the world, and you don't behave like this to your allies. And I think it was wrong, and it will have its repercussions. Okay, yesterday Kerry did change his phrasings. He's trying to please the Israeli government, maybe even some of the Israeli commentators, but this is not the way you behave. You can have your own disagreements, but you have your own channels to do it. You don't have to humiliate your best ally out in the open.
He did try, as you say, to maybe appease some of the commentators. This is what he said yesterday. Here's a U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry.
We believe the momentum generated by a humanitarian ceasefire is the best way to be able to begin to negotiate and find out if you can put in place a sustainable ceasefire, one that addresses all of the concerns, the long-term concerns as well. Begin to talk about the underlying causes of the conflict in Gaza, though those obviously will not all be resolved in the context of a ceasefire, a sustainable ceasefire discussion. But it is important to try to build, to begin, and to move in a process. And that's what we're trying to achieve. That is the only way, ultimately, this conflict is going to be resolved. Hopefully, if we can make some progress, the people in this region who deserve peace can take one step towards that elusive goal by stopping the violence which catches innocents on all sides in the crossfire and begin to try to build a sustainable way forward. We also believe that any process to resolve the crisis in Gaza in a lasting and meaningful way must lead to the disarmament of Hamas and all terrorist groups. And we will work closely with Israel and regional partners and the international community in support of this goal.
Amir.
In the last 36 years, there have been two-term Democratic Party presidents, Clinton and Obama. It is no accident that John Kerry, who was the Democratic nominee 10 years ago, was not in their club. He is patrician, he is aloof, he is a proper Bostonian. He is also a multi-millionaire now that he is married to Theresa Heinz. And he
meaning
does not,
what?
meaning that he does not come across as the warm, sympathetic American which the Israeli public wants to see. The words may be the same, the music is different, the tone is different. But putting aside the mood and the environment, the United States is not Israel's enemy.
Of course not. And to the contrary,
well, when you say of course not,
it's not obvious to all of them.
Right, but here in studio we can look at his rhetoric and hear his words. I mean, they're calling also U.S. President Barack Obama, when he spoke to Netanyahu, he called for a humanitarian ceasefire. He didn't call for a halt to all fighting and that's it. He called it for now.
Yes, but this is what they call a humanitarian window out of which or into which will step in the ceasefire, which is a very good and positive step, because you cannot get from here to there in one leap.
Exactly, and they are saying, of course, disarming Hamas, which is Israel's
not
goal.
only that. Throughout the last several years, every time there was some terror act or a rocket launched from Gaza, the Israeli government and the Israeli military have said the terror organization known as Hamas is the address. Okay, so this is the address. The Americans are addressing Hamas, and then the Israeli government turns around and cries out about it. So eventually they will have to sit down with Kerry and iron out what needs to be done.
Yossi, when we do hear disarming Hamas, also from the Israeli establishment, but also from the Americans, does it mean two different things? Is Israel looking to disarm Hamas in a way that Americans perhaps have a different plan to do so?
Well, I think we should differentiate between the rhetorics of the Israeli leaders, as they were stated last night by Prime Minister, Defense Minister, Chief of Staff, and a reality on the ground. I don't think that anyone in the Israeli government seriously thinks that it's possible to disarm Hamas.
Well, we had here in the morning, I'll just update you, that Uzi Landa, the tourism minister, that said it quite clearly that there is a way.
Well, that's why I say there is one should differentiate between the rhetorics and a realistic approach.
Okay.
I also want to demilitarize Gaza and to disarm Hamas, but it's not a doable goal unless you occupy Gaza. You put inside tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of soldiers who are going from house to house search, confiscate the weapons, destroy the tunnels, destroy the bunkers, destroy the arms caches, and then it's possible to prevent further smuggling of weapons into Gaza. But practically speaking, I think Israel would settle for future demilitarization of Gaza.
How? In what method? By the Americans? By the international?
Well, first of all, it's already in place. Practically, it's in place. They cannot bring weapons into Gaza because the Egyptian tunnels are closed. The Egyptians are on alert. They are guarding the border. From the Israeli side, it's impossible. From the sea, it's almost impossible. Maybe here and there they can bring some weapons. So practically, there is already at least a large-scale operation to prevent the smuggling of further weapons. Now, what they have in the ground, that would be much more difficult. And therefore, I think what the Prime Minister said was very ambiguous last night. He left all the options open.
Nothing new, really, did
Well,
he
he
say?
said he repeated the same stated goal and the demilitarization. Now, demilitarization can be further strengthened by an international mechanism, which we don't have at the moment. We don't have a ceasefire. We don't have a framework to negotiate with Hamas. If Qatar is not in the picture, so who has the levers to reach out to Hamas?
All right.
Netanyahu has a very moderate goal because he knows that he will be judged against the standard that he himself is setting. So his goal right now is only to detunnelize Gaza rather than to demilitarize it. He has said in his letter to Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, that the campaign against the tunnels is the first step towards demilitarization of Gaza. But Israel does not really want a demilitarized Palestine. In the West Bank, you have several battalions of the so-called Dayton troops, after General Dayton of the U.S. Army, who led and trained this. Israel wants a Palestinian force armed with weapons as long as it is not acting against it. So what Israel wants to do is to circumcise the will of Hamas to act against Israel. It is impractical to go there and collect the weapons and disarm Hamas.
Which then brings us back, of course, to the only option, which is diplomatically, but as Yossi said quite clearly, there's lacking now a broker.
There's no let's try and compare the political and diplomatic regional situation to what was in the 2012 campaign. You know, everybody compares the abilities of John Kerry to the abilities of the former secretary Hillary Clinton. But when Hillary Clinton came here 7 days after the Pillar of Defense operation started, she had contacts with the president of Egypt. She had contacts with the Turks. She had contacts with Abu Mazen at the time. In 2012, the Prime Minister of Egypt visited Gaza during the campaign. The foreign ministers of the Arab League visited Gaza during the campaign. We all remember the picture of the Turkish foreign minister Davutoglu crying when he saw the devastation at the Shifa hospital. Now he can cry only in front of the TV screen. No one is coming and going into Gaza. This is because there's this kind of change within political change in Egypt. So America does not have any other leverage towards Hamas unless it uses this Turkish Qatari access. Now, how can and suddenly, as we said, the Israelis are bringing Mahmoud Abbas as Deus ex machina. You know, for so many months they were discrediting him to dust, and now suddenly he is the solution. So, they have to think of a mechanism, the Israelis, and put it on the table. What will be acceptable? A realistic mechanism, how they expect...
But still brokered by the Americans.
To broker it. There's no other way. But how will the Americans broker it too? Because the Americans should have some access towards Hamas. So maybe it's Abu Mazen. I don't know if Abu Mazen is trusted enough by Hamas. So there are only three options as I see it. Either Abu Mazen or Davutoglu, the Turks, or Al-Attiyah, the Qatari. These are the channels
I beg to differ. The U.S. government has back channels when it wants to. For instance, there are pro-Hamas scholars teaching at U.S. defense colleges. When the U.S. government wants to have such a semi-private channel to Hamas, it knows how to do it. The makeup of a compromise is there. All you have to do is pick elements from this proposal, from that proposal, tie them all together. It's not beyond the realm of human endeavor.
I don't differ on this. There are also other back channels, even from prisoners that are being held in the Israeli prisons, and they can talk directly to the people in Gaza. But you need a certain political and diplomatic mechanism to cover it altogether. And this is what we are lacking at the moment.
Yossi, in the face of reality right now, the Israeli Defense Force, until there's a political or diplomatic channel that is viable and feasible, can we say that they're taking a different approach about, targeting Khania's house, targeting commanders of the Islamic Jihad and so forth, and trying to cripple maybe the leaders of these movements before, of course, disarming and going from house to house, as we've heard?
Well, once again, these are two different targets.
Okay.
I mean, trying to target commanders, military commanders of the Islamic Jihad or Hamas is a military move. It's a military action. Targeting the houses of Ismail Haniyeh last night and a week ago or 2 weeks ago of Mahmoud al-Zahar, empty houses, everyone knows that there is no one there, are just symbolic acts, political acts, and I would say also acts of frustration to send some sort of a message not only to the owners of these houses, but also to the Israeli public back home. And if I may add one more observation about the Israeli behavior, I think to a certain degree Israel is blind. It's blind on two fronts. On vis-a-vis Hamas, if you hear Israeli commentators and Israeli decision makers, you are confused because you don't know who is the real address now as far as Hamas is concerned. You hear Israeli officials saying that Khalid Mashal in Qatar is calling the shots. You hear others who are saying, no, Khalid Mashal is irrelevant, but it's the military wing of Hamas who are now the centers of power. And the second Israeli blindness is that we kill messengers who have all the goodwill to negotiate
to broker agreements,
and then we complain that there are no messengers.
And this, of course, is something that you're alluding, of course, to the U.S. Secretary of State.
Above all, the U.S. Secretary of State, and it's ungrateful behavior because we depend on America. We are thankful to America when they support us, when they finance our military equipment. They finance the Iron Dome, for example, and then when it comes to aspirations, efforts by the mediator to find a solution, we complain that it's a bad idea.
Thank you all to my panelists this morning, Yossi Melman, Arad Nir, and Amir Oren. We will be back after this very short break with more of this I-24 News Special Edition. Thank you for staying with us here at I-24 News Morning Edition. We, of course, are on a special broadcast this morning. It is day 22 of Operation Protective Edge. And as we've heard since the morning, rocket sirens were sounded throughout Israel's south and, of course, overnight here in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. With me now in studio is Dr. Ruchama Martin, the founder and president of Physicians for Human Rights. Dr. Martin, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
I want to start, of course, with what the world is seeing from the pictures that are coming out, and Israelis as well, maybe less so than other places in the world, and the pictures of suffering and the pictures of bloodshed. How can Physicians for Human Rights and other NGOs impact the stopping of the bloodshed in their own way? Because, of course, at the end, it's military versus military, and it's diplomatic leaders versus diplomatic leaders, and so forth.
And civil.
And civil servants versus civil servants, of course.
Maybe.
And it goes on and on.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't remember the question. What?
How do NGOs, such as Physicians for Human Rights, who have a detailed goal and mission, how do you fit in times of war?
It's a good question because we are working now. It's a little bit over 3 weeks. Day and night, we have a kind of hotline. 24/7, you say now?
Yeah.
Which means any day, any night, all the time, for people in Gaza to call us, and they do so. And then the whole thing starts, because we need to call either the army or Knesset members or the Red Crescent or the Red Cross, and to try to find a common channel for all of them, which is really, really hard.
To coordinate between all the different forces working in the Gaza Strip
and
today.
the people who are located or trapped in Gaza somewhere.
So people that are calling you, what is their main, I mean, you probably hear from so many different kinds of people and so many different kinds of requests. What would you say is the main request coming out of the Gaza Strip now to the Physicians for Human Rights?
It depends. When people are wounded or trapped and they cannot get out, they ask for help. This is normal. Get me out. Send an ambulance. Stop the fire. As if we can stop the fire. But from time to time we can. It's not easy. For example, the fire at Bet Hanun, I guess that we have been part of the whole manipulation to stop the fire at Bet Hanun. One of our
one of your
of our board member called some of the army high generals, and maybe this was one of the reasons to stop this awful fire in Bet Hanun. But not always we can do it, and not always, even if we are trying to do it, it helps.
We're going to get a quick update now from our I-24 news correspondent, Michal Divon. Michal, you're on the Israeli-Gaza border this morning. Can you give us the latest update?
Hi, Yael. So day 22 of the Operation Protective Edge. At this point, you can say a lot more of the same. We're seeing the same tactics being used by Hamas, targeting civilians with rockets and infiltrations through tunnels. These were, in fact, the two main objectives for the operation. Now, on the other side, we're hearing reports about numerous airstrikes conducted throughout the night. At least 150 targets struck overnight, specifically the home of Ismail Haniyeh and the Hamas Al-Aqsa radio and television here on the Gaza border. We're hearing drones and aircraft flying overhead. We've seen and heard a lot of choppers, Apaches striking the central Gaza Strip. We're standing here 2 kilometers away from Sajaiya, and just about 20 minutes ago, there was a mortar shell fired which landed not far from us, 200 meters here in an open field, causing a fire. So a lot of activity this morning, and unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of what we've become familiar with in these past 22 days.
And Michal, of course, we're hearing reports of more and more strikes within the Gaza Strip. International journalist based in the Gaza Strip overnight tweeted all night saying that this night especially was maybe the most intensified fighting that they've heard overnight. Some using the word the scariest fighting overnight. What have you heard from the IDF in terms of their targets overnight and this morning?
That's right, Yael. You can say there was a white night both for Gaza residents and also for the south of Israel. As I said, 150 targets overnight alone. We've spoken to some of the foreign journalists who've told us that it is absolutely impossible to sleep in Gaza as the airstrikes are continuous. We know that it's a highly dense area, and therefore there's definitely impact that shakes the buildings, even those that are around and not specifically affected. We know that the IDF is targeting very specific locations this past 24 hours since the unofficial ceasefire was broken. So we're hearing really about a lot of activity in the Strip, both naval, aerial, and ground operations. But this past 24 hours, as far as what we're hearing from the Israel-Gaza border, many more attacks are taking place. And this past night was a white night, both for Gaza residents and for Israeli citizens of the south and the Gush Dan area as well.
Michal Divan, our I-24 News correspondent there on the Israeli-Gaza border. Thank you, of course, for joining us this morning. Dr. Marton, I do want to go back to you. When you do get these calls from within, there's a lot of medical help that people in the Gaza Strip are needing, and also, of course, on the Israeli side. The IDF put up a hospital in the Erez crossing and are saying now that only 18 people have come since they've put it up. Is this a hospital or a makeshift hospital? Obviously, it's in the middle of the ground. Something that the Physicians for Human Rights can back and can work with, because of course it is there to help at the end of the day to save lives.
Yes, but no.
Okay.
Because we are not working for the Israeli government. And we are not working in any hospital. I mean, each and every one of us is working in one of the hospitals in Israel.
Right.
But not as on the payroll of PHR,
of course not.
because we are all volunteers. And when we are going to Gaza Strip, it's on a voluntary basis, and we are going into Palestinian hospitals in different places. And not only we are doing operations we are operating on, but also we are doing all kinds of training, because the people of Gaza cannot go out to get trained. And there are medical people that since 2007 didn't get the chance to get any
medical training
outside.
But this is in times of quote-unquote stability. In times of conflict as of now, where is Physicians for Human Rights? Where can they donate their experience?
We cannot donate our experience. We can donate, and that's what we did, to try to send medications and all kinds of medical equipment into Gaza. We managed to send material less than 1 million shekel in trucks into Gaza. And if we can, we will do it again.
And it reaches the hands needed? Do you know, you're able to verify that it reaches, of course, those that need it most?
We know exactly, because we are on a regular contact with Gaza, and we know exactly what they need. So we don't just take whatever it's in some store. We do it very carefully according to the needs.
I do want to thank you. I want to introduce here Tal Shalev, the diplomatic correspondent for I-24 News. Thank you for joining us, Tal. We are hearing, of course, the NGOs and so forth working in the Gaza Strip. And these are diplomatic efforts, I would say, the civil diplomatic efforts, if you will. The other diplomatic efforts are very, very weak right now in terms of, at least from the Israeli perspective. We heard the Israeli press conference yesterday with the three leaders saying, basically the headline is, we're going to continue to expand our operation.
Well, that's true. Netanyahu, Yalon, and Gantz yesterday did announce the expansion of the operation, but it's not, you couldn't understand in between the lines that we're talking about a substantial expansion of the operations, because the goal is still very modest. They're still talking about, Netanyahu said, we won't finish the operation without neutralizing the goals. This, of course, doesn't mean that the civil population in Gaza will not probably have horrible damages in the upcoming days, and we've seen the devastation in the past few days. But at least on the spokesperson side, the Israeli government and especially the IDF have been trying to present a picture of some kind of humanitarian flow. And Dr. Marton will probably be able to correct me if this is true, but some kind of humanitarian flow from inside Israel into the Gaza Strip. There's a General Yoav Mordechai, Major General Yoav Mordechai. He's the coordinator of the government actions in the Palestinian territories. He actually does have connections on the other side of the Gaza Strip. There is actually, Israel is one, aware of the humanitarian needs, and B, aware of the humanitarian picture that is portrayed after every kind of operation. Of course, doesn't mean that there's an open flow, but there is an attention to the humanitarian needs on the decision-making level. It is something, at least, that is brought up into the, even if it's just for PR reasons, which could be the case, but it is brought up into discussion.
Yeah, but the situation is really awful. I mean, people, at least, I don't know exactly the numbers, but around half of the population in Gaza, they don't have running water. The electricity is between 4 hours per 24 hours up to 10 hours, which is not enough. The fuel for hospitals is going to end, and they cannot operate their generator, or how do you say?
Generators.
Generators. And food, everything is in such a bad, very bad condition.
Indeed,
situation.
And I think that is something that has been accepted. I mean, it's the pictures are there, and people also on the Israeli side completely acknowledge this. I know Physicians for Human Rights don't take a political stance here, but some will say, and I'll be the devil's advocate.
Not exactly.
Okay, and I'll let you. I'll let you counter me on that. But I do want to propose this question. I'll be the devil's advocate here and say, you know, a lot of the Israeli political establishment and the civil population in Israel will say they don't have electricity because sometimes they're firing rockets to their own electric lines. They don't have proper hospitals because they're storing rockets in their hospitals, and so forth and so forth. What would you say to that?
It's the easiest thing is to blame the victim. It's going on all over the world, especially between men and women, in rape cases and so on. But coming back to Gaza, the medical situation or condition in Gaza is so bad for so very many years. We didn't need this awful new operation to see how bad it is, because they cannot develop anything. Everything is according to the Israeli regime. One cannot buy an aspirin without a permit. And the medications there are mostly Israeli products, which are very good, but very expensive, and they cannot buy wherever they want to. The same for medical equipment. They cannot render, they cannot fix old or broken medical equipment. I mean, anything is up to Israel to get a yes or a no, and the usual answer is no. That's true for every part of aspect of life in Gaza Strip. But if we are talking about medicine, nothing can be developed in Gaza, not because they are storing things in the hospitals. Maybe they are, maybe they are not, but their basic condition is no good.
And again, the basic condition no good is something that is, of course, I think accepted around the table, but some will also say, and I'm pushing you further here, is that the funds that have been, money funds that have been directed to the Gaza Strip, whether it be through Israel, whether it be through international aid, have not been directed to things like medicine and things like hospitals, things like schools, and have instead been directed to building Hamas infrastructure that we're seeing now, you know, more than ever, maybe even more advanced than we even thought about in Israel, concrete tunnels and so forth.
Well, I'm not an economist, and me for sure, I don't have any knowledge. I doubt the knowledge that is spread out. What kind of money was put into the tunnels, if it is the donations from the EU or from whatever, or it is a kind of so-called private money from Qatar or from I don't know where into it. So I don't trust this information at all. The facts are that the tunnels were built and the electricity of Gaza was bombed years ago. They have to buy their electricity from Israel. So, I mean, they cannot develop anything on their own.
Without being dependent.
The dependency on Israel is not by chance. It is coordinated and implemented all the time.
Tal, I want to let you respond as well.
It's not to respond, but I do think, at least when you see the political situation now, and when you hear Hamas demands, just to bring it back a bit more to the diplomatic realm, the Hamas demands, these economic demands, mainly have to do with Israel, not with Israel, with Egypt, the Arab world, the Arab League, the funding they get. These are Hamas demands for ceasefire. Basically, Hamas is now negotiating not with Israel, but with Mahmoud Abbas and with the entire Arab world. And so in many ways, the Hamas economic demands, most of them, it's true that there is a naval blockade, it's true that some of the crossings are running, there's a dependency, but the Hamas economic demands are now confronted to the Arab world, not to Israel. And I think in many ways, the situation that is created now is that this is becoming the Hamas problem, or the Gaza problem is now a problem of the Arab world that is taking some responsibility on what is happening there. And this could maybe lead, if the funding comes eventually from Saudi Arabia and not from Qatar, and comes from U.S. regional allies, comes from countries in the Middle East that Israel considers moderate, this could lead, or let's hope this could lead to a different situation. This, of course, has Israel does have a responsibility for what is going on in the Gaza Strip, but the Israeli captains will say, we left the Gaza Strip in 2007. In 2005, this is not our responsibility. Hamas did gain responsibility.
I just want to quickly, I will let you
responsibility. It is their responsibility.
Dr. Martin, I just want to tell our viewers, 1 second, we will let you respond that we're just seeing live footage now from the Gaza Strip that, of course, showing the resumption of attacks in the Gaza Strip. These are live photos now from the area. Dr. Martin, I will, of course, let you respond. It is...
Well, it's true what Tali said, but it's not the whole truth. Because the main demand of Hamas and the main demand of every single person in Gaza is to open the siege. If that would be, all the rest is an outcome. So the donations will be this way or the other, but if it will be open and people can go to the sea, not only for fishing, but to import and export, and to the little place from Rafah crossing, to import and export, and the sky. I mean, they are suffocated. So the way exactly and to pinpoint who will donate and how much and for what is not the main issue. The main issue is the siege. And this is up to Israel. Israel is doing the siege. And as long as the siege is continuing, all the rest is an outcome.
Despite the fact that the siege has also blocked the entrance of weapons. Even now, I mean, we're talking about weapons that have entered into the Gaza Strip. Some that even Israel wasn't aware about, that are now being used against Israeli civilians. I want Tal, of course, to take up on that point as well.
Yeah, I agree, but from Israel's point of view, there is a problem with lifting the siege, especially exactly because of that, and that is why I think personally the Arab world involvement here is important, because this way there will be a lifting of a siege with an assurance, some kind of international assurance. Let's hope it will stand and it will be firm enough, but some kind of international assurance that yes, we are transferring money, we are transferring, opening the skies. I don't think they'll open the skies, but we are opening some of the crossings, we're opening, lifting some of the siege, but Israel is getting some kind of assurance that this is not yet, not leading to arming, to another military, the weapon flowing into Gaza from Iran in the past few years and from other...
in the siege, so what we are talking about. So it makes so clear that the siege is
hurting the wrong people,
not working for the declared purposes,
Dr.
only to suffocate the people there.
Dr. Ruchama Martona, of course, the founder and president of Physicians for Human Rights. Thank you for joining us. Tal, thank you. We are going to hear some headlines now from around the world, the media around the world, and here in Israel from Gabi Tartakovsky, our I-24 News correspondent. Gabi, where are we starting?
We're starting with Walla, which reports about a blast from the past, no pun intended.
Okay,
but it appears
that's a pretty big pun, yeah.
Yes, it's a big surprise for the IDF to learn that Hamas uses rockets dating from 1973 Yom Kippur War. It seems the IDF armor units have found some rockets made in the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Southern Command suspects these were stolen during Mubarak's personal arsenal stockpiles.
Oh, wow.
They may have been stolen during his ouster in 2011 and were delivered to Gaza militants by Egyptian officials during Morsi's brief term in office. Now, the Saga rockets were initially used in 1973 in the traumatic Yom Kippur War for Israel,
right,
but were later used by the Hezbollah as well. Anyway, this comes as a big surprise for IDF troops on the ground.
Right, and maybe that goes along with what you said, that despite the siege, their rockets, even from 1973, were being able to get into the hands of the
The siege is a pretext.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a real solid fact.
It's not a
It's
strategy.
only against, right. Yes, it's only against the population.
All
Or
right.
not only, but mainly.
Gabi?
Speaking
Sorry.
of
No.
Speaking of NGOs, the Jerusalem Post reports about NGO Adala, which demands state allow legal representation to Gaza detainees. Now, Adala is the legal center for Arab minorities here in Israel, and it demands the Justice Ministry to publicize the names and locations of those Gazans who were detained by the IDF. The IDF confirms hundreds were detained by Israeli authorities during Operation Protective Edge. They were taken to an Israeli prison in southern Israel. The majority of them were released, but Adala still demands they will receive proper legal representation and threatened to appeal to the Justice Court in order to provide proper legal representation.
And on the
the families of those detainees are not informed, so they are in a big stress because they don't know if the people were killed or buried under the rubble or whatever.
And therefore, the families need to be contacted not only for legal reasons, but also for medical ones as well.
Yes. Moving on, Haaretz reports a Muslim leader says Australia should ban citizens from joining the IDF. The president of the Lebanese Muslim Association, Samir Dandan, spoke against Australia's ban on Australia's fighting in Syria and Iraq, while it still allows Australians to join the IDF forces. Not only that, but if you were an Australian citizen and you were fighting in Iraq or in Syria, you might be able to have summoned to Australian courts and be prosecuted for your actions during the military service.
What a comparison. So the comparing between the jihad in Iraq and Syria to, of course,
to the IDF. He says it's not fair, and those who serve in the IDF should face prosecution as well.
Okay.
He says prohibiting citizens from enlisting the Israeli army would make sure, quote, we don't create more heat within the Australian social fiber among people from different cultures.
Okay, well, entitled to his own opinion, I'm guessing here the Australian government is not heeding to his advice.
No, definitely not. We've seen the Australian pro-Israel policy as of late, denouncing East Jerusalem as an occupied territory. Obviously, his demands won't be suited by the Australian officials.
I suppose not. What else do you have for us?
A little clip, courtesy of the Israeli Home Front Command, which has been very active on social media. They now recruit Navi the Rabbit. He's a popular character, a star of Petting Corner, this animated online series.
Okay.
So he uses his catchphrase, cool, we can do it, but don't forget. And now he talks about Protective Edge and the protected spaces, and Israeli teen idols share their protective spaces for the audience to see.
All right, let's take a look.
היי, זה המרחב המוגן שלי.
זה
המרחב המוגן שלי.
המרחב המוגן שלנו.
זה המרחב המוגן שלי. המרחב המוגן שלי.
המרחב המוגן שלי.
מבלים בים, בבריכה.
האם אתם בתחנת אוטובוס?
יוצאים לבלות בערב?
סבבה, אפשר, אבל חשוב לזכור.
יוצאים לבלות בערב?
ברגע שהגעתם, תבדקו איפה המרחב המוגן.
במידה ונשמעת הזכאי שלך למרחב המוגן.
Gavi, is this in any sense, in any way convincing the young children to find a protective space?
Well, I think the parents are hysteric as enough and they don't need this video to rush their children to protected spaces.
Right.
I have to say, this is coming from Israeli celebrities. They have some very grim protective spaces.
Yeah,
it seems like some very ugly staircases in the background.
I have to say the rabbit is not really, the highest comics that I've seen, the highest level of comics. They could have added a little bit more juice into there. All
Definitely.
Right.
Lastly, something on the global news. Energy reports Pussy Riot members sue.
Wow, we forgot about them.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
And neither did Putin, because Pussy Riot members are now suing Putin for political prosecution. Two members of the punk group filed a lawsuit with the European Court of Human Rights. They demand more than $160,000 plus 10,000 euros as compensation for legal costs. They seek compensation from the Kremlin, citing violation of the rights to freely express their opinions, to personal immunity, and to a fair trial. They were convicted in 2012 for raising a riot after performing against President Putin, and they were released as part of an amnesty in December 2013, but now still seek justice.
Well, you'll be following that story
Definitely.
for us, of course, and we'll see if Putin has to, pull deep into his pockets and pay. That will be an interesting turn of events for the Pussy Riot. Indeed. Thank you all for joining me this morning. We're finishing our broadcast here. Of course, today is the 22nd day of Operation Protective Edge. Just to update you on the latest, there have been a few sirens in the Chof Ashkelon Regional Council. That is, of course, the southern part of Israel. And the IDF has resumed its artillery fire in the northern Gaza Strip. Also reminding us all that the IDF has cleared for publication that 10 IDF soldiers were killed in the past 24 hours. This brings the number of casualties on the Israeli side to 53 IDF soldiers, and the Palestinian Health Ministry has said put it at 1,100 Palestinians. We'll be back tomorrow.